There are some cases when you make a real estate reviews report where you're going to want to change the scattergram. The reason why is you might have something that looks like this. In this scattergram, you can see that the dots are pretty far from the line. So what that kind of shows us is that the information we're showing here is not super correlated. We want to have these dots close to this line. Now, how we can change this is actually pretty simple. All we have to do is create a new scattergram and then add that to the report. So in this case, to do that, we're going to click on the pricing button up here to take us to the pricing area of the Focus First software. And we're going to go ahead and create that same graph, but instead of using total square feet, we're going to try one of these other options. So let's click Finish Square Feet here, create the graph. We can keep both to show you the difference between the two graphs. And there we go. We have one that has a lot more of the dots on this line. Now this guy's way below here. You can see I'm just hovering my mouse over this, and you can see that it is at 2,514 square feet, or in this case, finished square feet. So you might want to take a look at that because someone's going to ask the question of why is that one so much below the line? If we look at that one, and I can go ahead and zoom in here as well just to make sure you can see this. On this finished square feet, this house here being 0.15 acres looks, a little bit like it only has about 1,400 above. I mean, this is a much smaller house compared to some of these other ones that above ground is 2,600, for example. So they might have a finished basement, but the house itself is a little bit different. If you had your MLS still open, which I don't in this case, you would go and look at this house. In this case, you discover that since this one was built in 2005, the rest were built more in the 90s. This one actually is a smaller townhome. So that's why it looks very different. So you could make the argument for deleting it from the graph, but in this case, we'll go and just leave it in there for the moment. We've created another graph. We have a good data point to discuss, just to really talk about. And what we're going to do here is going to put this on the real estate reviews report. In order to do this, we're going to click this button here that says Add to RER, which is short for Real Estate Reviews Report. Click Yes, and you'll see that our Real Estate Reviews Report graph now is updated. Now we have a Real Estate Reviews Report that has accurate data and is ready to go ahead and print and present to our customers. Now you might be asking, how do I know when I need to change the scattergram, or how do I make this scattergram graph different? We have resources for you to make sure you can understand all of that. The classes, both the Real Estate Reviews class and the new CMA Mastery class, go into depth on creating different scattergrams and how to make sure that your graphs are correct. And we have the ebook in your Real Estate Reviews resources area to help you stay on track when you're creating these reports. So now that we've done this, we've created all this graph, and we've changed it in there pretty easily. Let's talk about a couple things really quickly that you can and can't do on this graph. If I was to add text boxes to my data points here and create another graph showing, let's just say we just showed the address and the finished square feet, our new scattergram graph would look like this with text boxes. Because of the way the text boxes work and because of all the information in them, to create them in this smaller area gets really crowded and really confused. So we do not allow the text boxes to come from here to the Real Estate Reviews report graph. So we can create this, but when we add this to the reports, what you'll see is nothing happens because the text boxes do not come over. That goes the same with if you added a shape like a circle or an arrow or anything like that, it would not come over as well. One thing that will come over is adding user properties. So if we wanted to set, for example, of our customers' home purchase in here, just give them an idea of what they bought it at to start out with, which is a great way for people to understand how much value they have. We can add this in pretty easily by clicking that to add a user property. And if we add that user property, for this example, let's say they have about 2,000 finished square feet, about 3,000 total square feet, and they bought the house for, let's say, about $650. Now, by creating a graph with the user property, you can see here we have this red box. Move some of these here again. You can see why these would get confusing on a small graph, small picture. where they bought the house in the past here, basically saying, hey, this is what we're looking at for where you bought it. What would the change in value have been based on when they last purchased the home. So if this is where they bought it, and if this is where it ended up being, we can now go ahead and put this graph on the real estate review report, and again show you what comes over is that red dot or that red circle, but not the text box. Now this is a great way, especially if someone owned the house for a long time. You might see a red dot, for example. Let's say that they bought it at $600,000 and they had 3,000 finished square feet. The dot would be here. It really shows them the increase they've had and the equity that they might have in their house, and kind of gets them thinking about that amount of value. But again, you can create any scattergram you want to, add it to the real estate review report. Your user property will come over, but the text boxes and added shapes will not.